They did not punish him. They assigned him. The decision was made without debate and without his presence. No accusation followed, because none was needed. The sky was placed upon him as a solution, not a sentence. Nothing resisted. Nothing collapsed. The world remained intact the moment his burden began. From that instant forward, stability was no longer a condition. It became a dependency. And one body was removed from time so everything else could continue uninterrupted. There was no warning of duration. The weight did not increase, it simply did not end. To hold was not effort, it was requirement. Rest was not denied, it was irrelevant. Time adjusted around his stillness, measuring itself by the absence of collapse. Above him, days passed unnoticed. Below it, the burden did not ask for strength, only continuity. What began as placement quickly became permanence, and permanence removed the possibility of appeal. No mark recorded the moment endurance replaced judgment. The world adapted faster than anyone noticed. Structures formed on the assumption that the sky would remain where it was. Plans extended outward, upward, indefinitely. Above him, continuity was mistaken for certainty. Below it, he learned the quiet rule of imposed responsibility. Once something holds long enough, it is no longer thanked. It is expected. And expectation does not listen for consent. The silence around the task grew organized. No voice questioned the arrangement because nothing appeared wrong. Stability produced confidence, and confidence erased curiosity. Above him, decisions multiplied without contingency. Below it, he sensed the cost of reliability. When failure never arrives, preparation disappears. The burden did not strain his body. It trained the world to forget how fragile it was before someone else carried the weight for them. Over time, the task stopped being remembered as a choice. It became an assumption built into every calculation. Above him, systems expanded without redundancy, trusting the sky to remain obedient. Below it, he understood the deeper sentence. Responsibility imposed without voice does not end in collapse but in normalization. The world no longer relied on him consciously. It relied on the absence of alternatives, and reliance, once embedded, rarely admits it could have been designed differently. Nothing tested him. Everything tested the assumption built around him. Above, authority shifted toward whoever promised continuity, not understanding. Stability became proof of correctness. Below it, he recognized the pattern forming. When support never fails, questioning feels reckless. The task had done more than hold the sky. It had reshaped judgment itself, teaching the world to treat permanence as virtue and uncertainty as danger, long before either could speak in its own defense. As reliance deepened, alternatives vanished quietly. No one planned for absence because absence had never occurred. Above him, decisions narrowed toward maintenance, not adaptation. Below it, he understood the hidden cost of flawless support. When a system never bends, it forgets how to respond. Stability had stopped being a condition to preserve. It had become a rule to defend. And rules, once defended, resist change even when change is the only remaining path. The world began to measure itself against his silence. Problems were framed as deviations, not warnings. Above him, correction replaced reflection. Below it, he sensed the shift complete. What once required awareness now required obedience. Stability no longer described reality. It prescribed it. And when a condition becomes a prescription, anything that threatens it is treated not as information, but as error to be removed before it can be understood. With each passing cycle, distance replaced attention. Above him, memory shortened. The burden became background, then architecture. Below it, he recognized the final shift taking shape. Responsibility had moved from a visible body into an invisible rule. Once that happened, the task no longer belonged to anyone. It simply existed. And when responsibility exists without ownership, no one feels obligated to question it, protect it, or imagine an end. Forgetting completed the assignment. Once the cause vanished from memory, the burden lost even the possibility of meaning. Above him, stability became assumption, not achievement. Plans were made without fear because fear requires awareness. Below it, he understood the quiet cruelty of permanence. not to suffer briefly, but to sustain indefinitely a world that no longer knew it was being sustained. When support becomes invisible, it is no longer protected, it is consumed. From that point on, continuity governed everything. Above him, systems favored repetition over insight, maintenance over foresight. Nothing sought improvement because nothing appeared broken. Below it, he perceived the deeper consequence of being flawless. When failure never announces itself, learning stops. The task did not demand strength, it demanded silence, and silence, sustained long enough, reshapes a world more completely than force ever could. No ceremony marked the passing of responsibility from decision to doctrine. It settled quietly into habit. Above him, continuity was treated as proof that the arrangement was correct. Below it, he sensed how permanence alters memory. What is always present is rarely examined. The task no longer needed justification. It justified itself by lasting. And once duration becomes its own argument, questioning feels unnecessary, even irresponsible. As time accumulated, awareness thinned. Above him, people spoke of balance without naming its source. Stability was praised as natural, inevitable. Below it, he understood the distortion taking hold. What is maintained long enough begins to appear self-sustaining. The burden had not disappeared. It had been erased from consideration. And when support is mistaken for nature, no one feels accountable for what happens if it ever gives way. Gradually, contingency vanished from language. Above him, plans assumed permanence and dismissed variance as noise. Below it, he recognized the cost of flawless continuity. When nothing shifts, systems stop listening. Signals are treated as disruptions to be corrected, not messages to be read. The task did not suppress change directly. It trained the world to preempt it, mistaking stillness for intelligence and consistency for truth. Over time, responsibility was absorbed into structure. No one remembered assigning it, only depending on it. Above him, governance became administration of what already existed. Below it, he perceived the closing loop. When systems rely on a single unbroken support, they stop imagining alternatives. The burden was no longer held by him alone. It was held by habit. And habit, once entrenched, resists interruption more fiercely than any command. Silence became efficiency. Above him, outcomes mattered more than causes, results more than responsibility. Stability justified every extension built upon it. Below it, he sensed the quiet exchange taking place. The task no longer asked whether it should continue. It only asked whether anything dared to interrupt it. When continuity becomes the highest value, endurance is no longer seen as a burden. It is treated as a resource to be optimized and quietly exhausted. Nothing marked the moment dependence became necessity. Above him, structures expanded as if permanence were guaranteed. Below it, he sensed the risk taking shape. When support is assumed instead of secured, failure becomes unimaginable. The task drained urgency from decisions. Without urgency, caution faded. The world did not grow reckless, it grew comfortable. And comfort, sustained long enough, dulls awareness more effectively than any imposed blindness. Comfort altered judgment quietly. Above him, caution was reframed as pessimism. Planning for failure felt unnecessary, even disruptive. Below it, he understood the shift had completed itself. Stability was no longer something to preserve, it was something to defend. Once that happened, anything questioning continuity was treated not as foresight, but as threat. The task had not frozen the sky. It had taught the world to fear imagining it moving. That fear reshaped responsibility. Above him, leaders rewarded reassurance over accuracy, calm over preparation. Below it, he recognized the inversion complete. Stability no longer served understanding. Understanding served stability. When continuity becomes the goal, truth becomes negotiable. The task did not demand obedience. It made obedience feel reasonable. And what feels reasonable rarely invites resistance, even when it quietly guarantees that no one will be ready for change. Language adjusted to match the arrangement. Above him, words like risk and failure faded from use, replaced by confidence and balance. Below it, he sensed the danger in that shift. When failure cannot be described, it cannot be anticipated. The task no longer tested endurance. It tested the world's ability to notice its own dependence. And dependence, once unnamed, becomes invisible enough to be mistaken for strength. Invisibility completed the mechanism. Above him, reliance no longer felt like reliance. It felt like order. Below it, he understood the final exchange taking place. When a burden cannot be seen, it cannot be shared. When it cannot be shared, it cannot be questioned. The task remained unchanged, but its meaning dissolved. What persisted was function without recognition, continuity without care, and a world that mistook uninterrupted support for permanence. From there, correction became impossible. Above him, systems no longer included margins for adjustment. Everything was calibrated to a constant that never spoke back. Below it, he recognized the trap closing. When support is absolute, fragility migrates elsewhere. It accumulates quietly in decisions, in structures, in expectations. The task had not removed weakness from the world. It had displaced it, concentrating risk everywhere except where it was assumed to be. That displacement altered how collapse would arrive. Above him, no alarm was built for a failure that had never occurred. Below it, he understood the irony forming. The more reliable the support appeared, the less prepared the world became for its absence. Stability had not eliminated danger. It had postponed its recognition, and danger unrecognized does not vanish. It waits, embedded in confidence, until there is nothing left to absorb the consequence when continuity finally breaks. The arrangement required no maintenance because it allowed none. Above him, permanence was treated as proof that nothing needed attention. Below it, he sensed how neglect disguised itself as trust. When something never fails, care feels wasteful. Oversight feels redundant. The task did not decay. Awareness did. And when awareness erodes, systems continue operating long after they have lost the ability to respond to anything unexpected. Above him, routines hardened into belief. Stability was no longer maintained, it was assumed. Decisions referenced the sky without checking it. Plans expanded, as if support were infinite. Below it, he understood the quiet risk taking shape. When continuity is mistaken for guarantee, warning signs lose meaning. The world had not secured its future. It had grown accustomed to borrowing it, one unexamined moment at a time. That habit rewired judgment. Precaution felt unnecessary. Redundancy felt wasteful. Above him, efficiency replaced resilience. Systems optimized for permanence instead of failure. Below it, he sensed the narrowing margin. A structure that never rehearses collapse does not prevent it. It simply delays recognition. The sky remained still, and that stillness trained the world to ignore the cost of standing forever on something it never learned how to replace. Stability became doctrine. What held was assumed eternal. Above him, decisions favored continuity over preparation, comfort over contingency. Below it, he felt the danger settle in. The world had mistaken endurance for design. Nothing was built to adapt, because nothing had ever failed. When support never wavers, dependence stops looking like risk and starts looking like law. With every cycle, the weight felt less discussed and more assumed. Above him, systems grew taller, broader, more confident, each addition resting on the same unmoving support. Below it, he understood the shift had completed. What began as a sentence had become infrastructure. No one checked the base anymore. When support turns invisible, collapse stops being feared and starts being unthinkable. The stillness above him began to feel permanent, not because it was guaranteed, but because no alternative had been rehearsed. Stability erased contingency, plans assumed continuation. Failure was no longer modeled, only dismissed. Beneath the sky, he carried not just weight, but the absence of imagination. A world that forgets how to imagine collapse becomes dependent on what it refuses to see. What had been a sentence slowly became infrastructure. The sky was no longer something held, it was something assumed, Systems grew heavier because nothing pushed back. Redundancy disappeared. Caution was rebranded as inefficiency. Above him, confidence replaced awareness. Below it, he understood the deeper cost. When support is perfect, everything built on it forgets how to stand. Stability reshaped judgment. Decisions favored what kept weight unchanged, not what corrected error. Above him, authority learned to equate continuity with truth. Below it, he recognized the trap forming. When interruption is treated as danger, correction becomes impossible. The sentence no longer tested endurance, it trained obedience. The sky stayed still, and the world mistook that stillness for wisdom, forgetting that wisdom requires the freedom to adjust before collapse. Normalization followed. What began as a sentence hardened into infrastructure. Schedules formed around an unmoving sky. Measurements assumed permanence. Above him, planning replaced caution. Below it, he felt the burden shift from weight to obligation. The world no longer asked if the load could be held, only how much more could be added. Stability became a budget to spend. The punishment succeeded because it removed urgency, teaching everyone to build without accounting for failure. Silence replaced judgment. No reminders were issued, no inspections followed. Above him, confidence grew precisely because nothing appeared to move. Below it, he understood the deeper design of the sentence. By eliminating visible strain, it erased accountability. If the sky never shifted, no one had to ask who held it. The burden worked best when unnoticed. What could not be seen could not be questioned, and what could not be questioned could be endlessly relied upon. With time, stability became doctrine. Movement was no longer a risk to manage, but a flaw to eliminate. Above him, systems were praised for remaining unchanged. Below it, he felt the weight shift from his body into the world's thinking. When nothing moves, adaptation dies quietly. The sentence no longer preserved order, it preserved habit. And habit, once protected, resists correction more fiercely than chaos ever did. Pressure did not arrive as violence, it arrived as expectation. The sky remained steady, so demands grew heavier. Above him, reliance hardened into entitlement. Below it, he understood the trap fully. The task was no longer to hold the weight, but to guarantee it would never be questioned. Stability had become a promise the world felt owed, and he was the only proof it still worked. Nothing announced the shift. Requests stopped, explanations vanished. Above him, decisions were made as if his position were a law of nature. Below it, he felt the sentence change shape. What had begun as burden became infrastructure. When something holds long enough, it stops being seen as effort and starts being treated as terrain. The sky was no longer being carried, it was being assumed. With his presence normalized, responsibility evaporated. Above him, systems expanded without redundancy, trusting the sky to remain fixed. Below it, he understood the quiet risk of permanence. Stability had trained the world to forget contingency. No one prepared for failure because failure had been removed from imagination. The sentence no longer tested endurance alone. It tested whether a world built on certainty could survive the first moment certainty cracked. Time did not mark his suffering, it concealed it. Seasons passed above him without pause, reinforcing the illusion that balance required no cost. The sky became scenery, the ground became routine. What was held was no longer questioned. In that quiet repetition, the sentence achieved its final efficiency. Pain that produces no disruption is quickly reclassified as irrelevant. The world did not deny his burden. It simply stopped noticing it. Normalization completed the punishment. What began as an exception hardened into structure. Plans assumed permanence. Risk was treated as impossible. Above him, expansion accelerated because support felt absolute. Below him, the weight did not grow heavier, only quieter. When reliance becomes invisible, responsibility disappears. The sky did not press harder. Expectation did. And expectation, once embedded, demands endurance without acknowledgement or end. Memory began to fracture. His name survived unevenly, spoken as reference, not presence. The act was remembered, the condition was not. People spoke of balance without mentioning who enforced it. Stability became tradition. Tradition replaced explanation. Above him, the world inherited certainty without context. Below him, the silence deepened. When a burden outlives its explanation, it stops being questioned. It simply becomes part of how things are. Time did not mark his endurance as event. It treated it as infrastructure. Seasons passed, eras layered themselves, and the weight remained constant. Above him, change felt natural because its cost was hidden. Below him, repetition replaced hope. Nothing improved or collapsed. It only continued. That was the efficiency of the sentence. By removing the need to decide again, it removed the possibility of mercy. Nothing in the world acknowledged his effort anymore. The sky stayed where it was supposed to stay. Gravity obeyed. Distance behaved. Order looked natural. That was the final refinement of the punishment. When a burden works perfectly, it disappears from attention. He did not need to be watched, praised, or remembered. Function replaced presence, and once presence was gone, responsibility dissolved with it. Above him, generations passed without alteration. Children were born under a stable sky and never learned to fear its weight. Myths shifted, names blurred, causes thinned. What remained was assumption. The world assumed balance was natural, inevitable, permanent. Below it, he felt the quiet violence of that belief. When stability is assumed, no one prepares for loss. And when no one prepares, collapse does not arrive as shock. It arrives as confusion. Time did not reward endurance, it normalized it. What began as an extraordinary burden became invisible infrastructure. Above him, calendars filled, empires shifted, and decisions assumed permanence without cost. Below it, he understood the trap. When support never fails, dependence deepens. The world did not become stronger because the sky stayed still, it became careless. And carelessness, sustained long enough, turns necessity into neglect. Neglect did not arrive as cruelty. It arrived as efficiency. No one checked what no one expected to move. Stability removed curiosity. Curiosity removed caution. Above him, systems stacked themselves higher, heavier, more confident. Below it, he felt the weight increase without acknowledgement. The burden had grown, not because the sky demanded more, but because the world had learned it could add endlessly without consequence. What changed next was not the sky, but expectation. The world began planning as if support were infinite. Margins vanished. Redundancy felt wasteful. Above him, ambition expanded without restraint. Below it, he sensed the quiet danger of success taken for granted. When nothing has ever fallen, everything is built taller, and height, without respect for weight, always turns stability into a countdown no one knows has started. The longer it held, the less anyone remembered why it needed holding. The sky became background, no different from stone or sea. Gratitude faded first, then awareness. Above him, decisions were made with confidence sharpened by amnesia. Below it, he understood the deeper sentence. To be essential was not enough, he had to become invisible. Only then could the world move freely, convinced that what carried it had never existed at all. In that invisibility, the punishment reached its final form. Pain could be endured, weight could be measured. But erasure had no edge to resist. The world above him no longer feared collapse, because collapse required memory of support. Stability felt natural, self-sustaining, earned. He remained beneath it all unchanged, while meaning drained away. What had once been a sentence imposed on one body became a condition the world stopped noticing, and therefore stopped questioning. Nothing signaled the continuation of the sentence. There was no renewal, no reminder. The sky remained where it was because it always had. That constancy erased urgency. Above him, generations learned a world that did not need explanation. Below it, he understood the quiet efficiency of the design. A punishment that requires no supervision lasts longer than one enforced by force. When maintenance disappears, permanence feels deserved, and responsibility dissolves into habit. Distance finished the transformation. He was no longer a presence, only a precedent. The sky became infrastructure, not miracle. Above him, authority borrowed certainty from his silence and called it order. Below it, he felt the cost of being reliable without voice. When stability never fails, it teaches the world to forget contingency. Forgetting felt like peace. It was not. It was dependence disguised as calm. A system that rests on one body learns comfort first and resilience last. Time did not weaken the sentence. It refined it. Each season that passed without collapse strengthened the belief that collapse was impossible. Above him, planning grew bolder. Safeguards were removed. Redundancy felt wasteful. Below it, he understood the paradox taking shape. The longer he held, the more the world required him to never stop. Reliability became obligation. Obligation became law. And law, once normalized, no longer asks who carries it. That normalization erased urgency. Warnings lost weight. Preparation felt unnecessary because nothing had ever failed. Above him, confidence hardened into doctrine. Systems were praised for efficiency, not resilience. Below it, he felt the shift. Holding was no longer effort but expectation. Support stopped being seen as a condition and became nature itself. When support turns invisible, failure is no longer imagined, and what cannot be imagined is never prevented. That illusion of permanence reshaped responsibility. Because the sky did not fall, no one felt accountable for keeping it stable. Maintenance disappeared as a concept. Vigilance was replaced by habit. Above him, continuity was mistaken for guarantee. Below it, he understood the danger clearly. When a system works for too long, it stops being protected. It starts being assumed. And assumption is how collapse is prepared long before anything breaks. That assumption spread upward. Structures grew heavier because no one measured their weight anymore. Additions were made without subtraction. Every new demand leaned on the same unmoving point. Above him, complexity increased without reinforcement. Below it, he felt the strain translate into time rather than pain. Not suffering, but accumulation. The sky did not crush him, it aged him. And aging, when endless, is another form of erosion. What followed was not collapse, but confidence. The longer the sky stayed where it was, the more permanent it felt. Above him, precautions were removed as unnecessary. Margins disappeared. Balance became assumed rather than maintained. Below it, he understood the quiet danger of success without feedback. When nothing fails, nothing is checked. The sentence had trained the world to trust stillness blindly, and blind trust always grows heavier before it breaks. That trust reshaped responsibility. When stability feels guaranteed, accountability dissolves. Above him, decisions were made faster, with less thought for consequence. Systems leaned harder on what never complained. Below it, he felt the shift clearly. The weight did not increase, but reliance did. What once required vigilance now demanded obedience. The sentence no longer preserved the world. It enabled it to forget how fragile permanence always is. With forgetting came confidence. The world began to build upward without measuring below. Plans assumed the sky would remain where it was, because it always had. Above him, permanence was treated as law. Below it, he understood the danger of that belief. Stability had stopped being maintained and started being presumed. The sentence no longer asked effort from anyone else. It asked only silence from the one who carried it, and silence is the easiest condition for neglect to survive. That neglect reshaped responsibility. When nothing visibly fails, accountability fades first. Above him, decisions multiplied without safeguards, because the foundation had never protested. Below it, he felt the weight become less physical and more symbolic. He was no longer holding the sky alone. He was holding the belief that nothing could ever fall. And belief, once detached from effort, becomes the most fragile structure a world can depend on. That belief altered how the world prepared for the future. Systems stopped imagining collapse because collapse had never occurred. Redundancy felt unnecessary. Caution felt inefficient. Above him, plans assumed permanence as a given. Below it, he understood the deeper sentence. He was not preserving the sky anymore. He was preserving the illusion that preservation required no cost, no vigilance, and no one watching to ensure it continued. That illusion hardened into certainty. The sky was no longer something being held, it was something assumed. Above him, generations planned without accounting for failure, weight, or strain. Below it, he felt the shift complete. His role had disappeared from awareness, while remaining essential to function. The world no longer relied on him consciously. It relied on forgetting him entirely. And forgetting, once normalized, became the most efficient form of control. By then, the punishment no longer needed enforcement. No guards remained, no decree was repeated. Habit carried the weight. Above him, stability was praised as wisdom. Below it, he understood the design, a burden that persists without supervision. When a sentence becomes routine, resistance appears irrational. The sky stayed where it was, not because it was held, but because the world had organized itself around the certainty that it would not move. Silence completed what force began. No one asked how long it could last. Duration became assumption. Above him, generations were born into a world already balanced, already supported. Below it, he felt time lose texture. Days did not differ. Years did not accumulate. The sentence erased sequence. When nothing changes, history stops asking questions. The sky remained fixed, and meaning drained from the act that kept it there, leaving only continuation without witness. Continuity became the virtue everyone defended. Any hint of strain was dismissed as imagination. Above him, maintenance replaced curiosity. Below it, he understood the final efficiency of the sentence. It did not require obedience, it required forgetting. When support is constant, dependence hides inside normalcy. The sky did not need praise, it needed silence. And silence kept the system intact, far better than fear ever could. Eventually, even the idea of burden disappeared from language. There was sky, therefore there had always been support. Cause and effect separated cleanly. Above him, planners spoke of permanence as if it were natural law. Below it, he felt the weight settle into routine. The sentence succeeded because it stopped being noticed. What is never questioned becomes permanent by default. And permanence, once assumed, no longer needs justification. Nothing signaled the danger. That was the final refinement of the sentence. No cracks, no tremor, no warning worth naming. Stability had erased the language of collapse. Above him, confidence replaced caution. Below it, he understood the quiet trap of reliability. When something never fails, preparation becomes unnecessary. The world no longer depended on strength, only on assumption. And assumption is weakest exactly where it feels safest. Dependence hardened into routine. Systems built taller, lighter, thinner, trusting the unmoving sky as a constant. Above him, expansion ignored margin. Below it, he felt the load increase without ceremony. The sentence evolved while remaining the same. Holding was no longer the task, compensating was. Every improvement added weight, every optimization removed mercy. The world called it progress. He felt it as compound interest on a debt no one tracked. No signal announced the limit. There was only strain normalized into background noise. Above him, confidence grew precisely because nothing failed. Below it, he understood the trap of reliability. When something never breaks, it becomes invisible. Requests stopped. Adjustments stopped. The load increased by neglect rather than intent. He was no longer considered strong or punished. He was assumed, and assumptions, once settled, are heavier than judgment because they are never revisited. Nothing above him suggested urgency. The sky remained fixed, flawless, unquestioned. That perfection became the final illusion. Stability erased curiosity. Curiosity erased caution. The world stopped asking what sustained it and began designing futures that assumed the support was eternal. Below it, he felt the shift from burden to destiny imposed. Not chosen, not renewed, just carried forward by habit. The sentence endured because it no longer looked like a sentence. Time did not weaken the weight, it normalized it. Each era inherited the sky already held in place and mistook that inheritance for nature. No gratitude formed because no absence had ever been felt. Above him, generations planned without contingency. Below it, he understood the final mechanism of control. When responsibility is never revisited, it becomes invisible. And what is invisible can be relied on forever until the moment it fails. Nothing was resolved. The sky remained steady. The world continued. That was the success of the sentence. Not justice, not balance, but continuity without acknowledgement. He was not remembered because remembrance would imply choice. He was not freed because freedom would expose the cost. The burden stayed where it had always been, doing its work in silence, and silence became the final structure holding everything together.